Hi, everybody. We continue our afternoon sessions, and our presenter is Bruce Silver. Bruce is known as the best BPMN and DMN trainer who taught thousands of practitioners worldwide. He is also a very serious contributor to these standards. And today, Bruce will explain why DMN with a complete fill could become the best low-code standard. Right, Bruce?
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Jacob. And hello, everyone. As Jacob said, I'm a long-time DMN practitioner, and from the beginning have been one of its biggest boosters. I've written 2 books on it, 3 generations of DMN training. So you could call me a true believer. But while DMN continues to gain traction, even I would have to admit it has so far underperformed in the marketplace. The industry analysts say, okay, we're aware of it, but what's the killer app? It may not be what you think. So let's go back to the beginning, 2016. The DMN standard was brand new. I had been posting about it, and Jacob asked me to introduce it in the DecisionCAMP keynote that year. As standards go, DMN was unusual, an executable modeling language intended for use by subject matter experts in a way that standards like BPMN were not. Executable logic will be defined graphically using a set of tabular formats called boxed expressions with a business-friendly expression language called FEEL used in the table cells. Executable models without programming. At that time, DMN was just a spec. There were no runtime implementations. But I also noticed that among tool vendors on the DMN 1.1 task force, which I had recently joined, that there was no great urgency to implement it. And in my talk, I complained about that. Of course, it was the things that made FEEL and boxed expressions business friendly that also made them difficult to implement. Spaces and variable names, for example, and tables nested potentially without limit inside other tables. But at that meeting, Mark Proctor of Red Hat told me, don't worry, my guy will have a DMN runtime in 6 weeks. It actually took his guy, Ed Centorelli, more than 6 months, but it worked very well. And Red Hat made the FEEL parser and DMN runtime open source. So by 2017, we had an open source runtime, and there was little excuse for tool vendors not to fully implement DMN. A few did, but most decision management vendors continued to resist FEEL and box expressions. In fact, they questioned the original premise that business users really wanted to go beyond defining requirements handed off to programmers, or if they did, that they had any interest in basing that on the DMN standard, even though those had been central to the original DMN RFP. One vendor that did believe in the original premise, as I did, was Tricitech, and I soon moved my DMN training over to their platform, which was aimed squarely at non-programmers. So let's fast forward to today, 6 years later. As you can see, DecisionCAMP has a lot more sponsors. The DMN standard continues to get better. Every year, a new version. But still, few tool vendors have implemented it beyond DRDs and decision tables. Interest in my DMN training has increased, but it is only now catching up to my BPMN training, which is focused on descriptive, that is, non-executable models. So it's a little discouraging. Yet, despite all that, I'm more hopeful today than ever about the promise of DMN's key features, field and boxed expressions. And that's because they are the keystones of what I believe is a far larger opportunity. Back in 2010, the process modeling standard BPMN 2.0 promised business users, what you draw is what you execute. I used to say that myself. But not really. What makes a process model executable are the services implementing the tasks and the process data and expressions used to orchestrate them. But for those things, BPMN has always required programming. That standard provides nothing like field and boxed expressions for non-programmers. While the activity flow semantics can be defined by business users in diagrams, making those diagrams executable has always required Java programming. So diagrams created by business and handed off to programmers for implementation has been standard practice in process automation for a dozen years now. A few years later, DMN set out to be different from that. If you're unfamiliar with OMG standards, they start with an RFP that lays out the objectives of the standard. And DMN was distinctly different from BPMN in that it wanted to enable business users to do more than create requirements handed off to programmers. To that end, the DMN standard itself defines a graphical low-code language for decision logic implementation, a set of standard tabular formats called box expressions, and a friendly expression language for the table cells called field. Although DMN allows tools to assert so-called level 1 conformance without supporting field and boxed expressions, field and boxed expressions comprise the bulk of the DMN spec: the syntax, the semantics, the operational behavior, and the graphical formats. Unfortunately, most decision management vendors, especially those who formerly called themselves business rule engine vendors, failed to adopt field and boxed expressions, preferring the traditional arrangement in which business creates requirements handed off to IT for implementation in some proprietary language. And they continue to do so today, although in so doing, they ignore the original promise of DMN. It's important to understand that decision logic is more than decision tables. For example, it must refine the raw input data into the variables that are used in the decision tables. And in fact, field and box expressions not only do that, but they represent a complete low-code language suitable for any kind of business logic, not just that related to operational decisions. Even though field and boxed expressions are defined within the DMN spec, their utility extends far beyond the boundaries of traditional decision management. For example, over the past 2 years, the Tricitech platform has quietly been adding automation capabilities to its BPMN models in a different way, a low-code way, leveraging field and box expressions borrowed from DMN. By now, that business automation platform is quite complete. And I believe Denis Gagne talked about it yesterday. So this goes beyond business users creating decision surfaces. This is enabling them to create full-fledged business automation services themselves, graphically, so that what you draw actually is what you execute. Now, I use the term business automation to mean the combination of business logic automation and process automation. And DMN combined with BPMN offers a low-code approach to it based on standards. If subject matter experts learn to create decision models using DMN with field and box expressions, it's just a small additional step to do low-code business automation themselves. Model, test, and cloud deploy as a REST service, no programming required. Low-code means model-based software development. It's accessible to technically inclined business users as well as to developers. The fact is, interest in low-code business automation is exploding. Gartner says 65% of all solution development will be low-code by 2024. And the term low-code has already popped up numerous times in DecisionCAMP this year. So that's an addressable market larger by orders of magnitude than decision management. The key benefits: time to value. Model-driven development is simply faster than code, and avoiding the IT resource bottleneck, since subject matter experts can do much of it themselves. And that's why I see these DMN features, field and box expressions, which have frankly languished in the world of decision management, as the key to something new and exciting today, an opportunity that is much larger than decision management. Actually, low-code business automation is DMN's killer app. So why is this happening now? The fact is, over the past 6 years, the software world has changed completely. Reason number one, the cloud. The cloud has revolutionized software totally, both tools and runtime. Large enterprises have largely overcome the resistance to putting critical data in the cloud. In addition to its well-known benefits to IT, the cloud makes business automation tools and runtime directly accessible to business users. They don't need to wait for IT to provision or maintain the tools or the runtime. The DecisionCAMP platform, for example, is entirely cloud-based and business user-focused. In one click, BPMN and DMN models are compiled and deployed as REST services in the cloud. Reason number two, REST APIs. Today, you can find a public REST API for just about anything you need. You don't have to build it. Someone else has already done it. It's there, accessible to you via a simple web message. Aggregators like rapidapi.com, and there are others, provide a centralized search, subscription, and SDK for thousands of public REST APIs. In addition, standards like OData allow you to generate REST APIs for your own applications and databases. For example, Skyvia Connect generates OData endpoints for over 100 apps and databases. Each endpoint exposes 5 REST operations per database table automatically. And there's more. On the DecisionCAMP platform, DMN itself generates a REST API for any business logic you create yourself. And BPMN similarly generates REST APIs for your own executable process logic. So today, REST APIs are everywhere. Business automation is really just orchestration of services, some created by you, but mostly created by others. And reason number three is COVID and its aftermath, the current labor shortage. It is nearly impossible today to hire skilled programming resources. So getting new projects off the ground just takes too long. But what if you could teach subject matter experts to create solutions themselves. That's what the current excitement over low code and no code tools is about. No code is used primarily for situational apps in HR and CRM. I'm more interested in low code, logic equivalent to a DMN decision model that, in combination with the cloud and REST APIs, can automate critical core business activities in things like financial services and healthcare. So let's see how low-code business automation with DMN and BPMN works, and then go back to the key questions that have dogged decision management vendors from the start. Do business users really want to do this? And does basing the tools on standards make a difference? Here is an example of a vacation request process as it would be modeled in BPMN using my non-executable methodology called method and style. Not a core business process, but it's illustrative and it's very simple. A vacation request is processed by decision logic that either automatically approves it, refuses it, or refers it to the manager. And if ultimately approved, the requested days are deducted from the employee's accrued vacation time. And here is the executable version of it using low-code business automation. The BPMN is similar, but the activities now are more fine-grained. The icons in the top left corner indicating specific capabilities of each BPMN task type. But the most obvious difference is the model now includes process data and data flow. The dog-eared page icons in the diagram, called data objects, represent the process variables. In low-code business automation, feel defines the data language, the data types and expressions. In the runtime environment, feel is converted to JSON automatically by the platform. Feel and JSON types are actually quite similar. The dotted arrows in the diagram, called data associations, represent mappings between the process variables, which are defined by the process modeler, and the task variables, most of which are defined by each invoked service. In low-code business automation, these mappings are defined using feel and box expressions. The activities with these spreadsheet icons, called decision tasks, invoke DMN decision services. As I mentioned, DMN is in reality a low-code language that can be used for all modeler-defined business logic, not just what we normally call decisions. Here we have two decision tasks. The first one validates the data input vacation request to avoid runtime errors, and the second one is the automated approval logic. A BPMN decision task is bound to a DMN decision service. And here you see the data input validation decision. DMN is actually an excellent language for data validation. A collect decision table, hit policy C, produces a list of error messages. Data validation logic typically uses some of the lesser known field functions and operators. Generalized unitary tests, and the instance of operator, as you see here. Also the get entries function, which lets you test all components of a structure at once, and the match function for pattern matching using regular expressions. Just to repeat, DMN is not only about decision tables. It's a low-code language for any business logic. For example, the vacation request specifies the employee's requested start and return date, but the approval logic requires knowing the count of requested days. Field has excellent support for calendar arithmetic, but finding the count of requested days is a little complicated. We can't simply subtract the dates. We need to exclude weekends and holidays as well. So this boxed expression that you see on the right is called a context. It lets you break up a complex value expression into pieces using local variables, something most other low-code languages cannot do. For example, here there are 5 context entries, each defining a local variable and its value expression. And the final result expression at the bottom references those local variables. Note that the 4th context entry uses a decision table, an example of a table nested inside another table. Context box expressions let you make complex logic business-friendly without cluttering up the DRD with dozens of tiny decisions. In the DMN model, a decision service defines the parameters called by the BPMN decision task. The decision service outputs are selected decision nodes in the DRD, and the tool then calculates the required service inputs. Here, the service validate vacation request has input parameters, vacation request, and original employee record, and output parameters, validation errors, and employee record. In BPMN, the decision task validate vacation request is bound to that decision service. The task inputs are by definition the decision service inputs, and the task outputs are the service outputs. In the process model, the dotted arrows called data associations represent mappings between the process variables, here called vacation request and employee record, and the task inputs and outputs. So from the diagram, you see there are input mappings from vacation request and employee record, and an output mapping to validation errors. Since all data is represented as field in the modeling environment, the mappings use box expressions in field, similar to boxed invocation in DMN. Here, the mappings are essentially identity mappings, but any field expression could be used. In BPMN, an activity with the gear icon called a service task calls an external REST service. Simply bind it to a REST operation in the model's operation library and map process variables to the service inputs and outputs. For example, employee vacation data is a MySQL database table on my website. And here you see it in PHP MyAdmin. It holds the employee's accrued vacation time. A third-party service, Skyvia Connect, introspects the database and generates a REST endpoint for it and a metadata file used to configure automatically a Tricitech connector, exposing 5 database operations on the table using OData. We will use the find or query operation to retrieve the record for the requesting employee. We bind the service task, get employee data, to the find or query operation of this endpoint in the operation library. Then we model mappings between the process variables and the service input and output parameters using field and boxed expressions. Here, the data mapping for the input parameter $filter uses a field expression to create a query string in the OData language. Very simple. Once we're done, the whole vacation request process is itself deployed as a REST service in the Tricitech cloud. The data input, vacation requests, and the data outputs, approval out, and vacation validation errors are the service parameters. So this business automation service can be called by any REST client app with the appropriate credentials. So hopefully this gives you the flavor of how subject matter experts can create business automation services using field and box expressions without any programming. All right, so what kind of business automation services can make use of this? Currently, the Trisotech platform is used most heavily in integration-centric processes in healthcare and financial services. Digital mortgage underwriting is a great example, as there are many complex rules. You might say that's a straight decision management problem, but it's really a process. You need to first get the data from various sources, validate the data, transform it to testable values, apply some high-level decision logic, and finally format and store the outputs. Low-code business automation can do all of that in a single composite service. I'm currently working with a large accounting firm to create general ledger entries triggered by business events related to financial assets and trades, financial portfolio assets and trades. It's high volume, involves many database tables, a lot of computation. So it's perfect for DMN and BPMN. With low code, solutions like these are much faster to build, faster to test, faster to deploy than with Java, and they are easier to maintain. Okay, so who can create apps like these? I admit it's not every business user or subject matter expert. Most of my BPMN method and style students probably could not do it very well. But anyone who can create executable decision models using field and box expressions certainly can. You only need to have some basic facility with data and expressions and the patience to debug when things don't work out right the first time. That's just a subset of business users, but in most companies, subject matter experts who can do that still greatly outnumber programming staff. Microsoft used to call them citizen developers. Now they're calling them software makers, a term I like better. To turn subject matter experts into makers, I had to completely revise my DMN training. Originally, I had a course, DMN Basics, that focused on DRDs and decision tables, since that's all most DMN tools supported, and it's something every business user can understand. The problem is, you cannot do anything useful with only that, except to provide requirements handed off to others. So in the revised training, I focus on field and box expressions. Those are the critical elements. And yes, subject matter experts who are not programmers can learn to understand and use them well. You just have to show them how. They feel empowered because they are empowered. Once you fully understand DMN, low-code business automation is mostly a matter of learning how to find and orchestrate REST APIs. Okay, so you're saying there are already a large number of low-code business automation tools available, and that's true. Basically, all of them use their own proprietary scripting for the low-code piece, just as many decision management vendors use their own proprietary rule languages, which they also say are business-friendly. But field and box expressions, that is DMN, not only non-proprietary, they're actually more business-friendly and often more powerful. For example, field and box expressions make DMN more powerful and more business-friendly than PowerFX, Microsoft's well-known low-code expression language used in Excel formulas and Microsoft Power Apps. Without box expressions like context, PowerFX must pack complex logic into single literal expressions. And PowerFX's lack of infix operators makes these expressions deeply nested functions that are difficult to understand. For example, for comparison, here's an example published by Microsoft Marketing showing how PowerFX can extract the last word in a string. They were very proud of this. So let's see, is that 4 or 5 right parens at the end? Here is the equivalent in field. The split operator tokenizes the input string based on the space character, and bracket -1 bracket means take the last item. Now, you tell me, which is more powerful, which is more business friendly? All right, so why are DMN users not demanding their tool vendors support field and boxed expressions? It's mostly lack of awareness. Most of what other folks write about DMN just talks about DRDs and decision tables. Possibly even many of you here at DecisionCAMP were not aware of what field and box expressions do. It's also the need for training. You need to learn the language. Developers can generally learn from books and articles, but business users by and large cannot. They need training, a methodology that leads them through it step by step, and it must be hands-on using the tools. So that's an investment in money and time, definitely a barrier. Third, as everyone here knows, automation is unforgiving. If the slightest thing in your model is wrong, you'll get an incorrect output, or worse, a runtime error. So automation requires debugging, and not all business users have the patience or the discipline for that. But a major reason also, probably the most important reason, is the determined resistance from decision management vendors. Even though DMN is a standard, most vendors on the RTF still do not support it beyond DRDs and decision tables. Feels too hard, they say. Business users don't want to create implementations, just requirements. They say it all the time. Field and box expressions are a distraction, not fundamental to DMN. We even heard this last year at DecisionCAMP. So that lack of support from incumbent decision management vendors is why I've come to doubt that decision management is the best opportunity for DMN. A better opportunity is low-code business automation. And this takes us all the way back to the original questions. Do subject matter experts, business users, really want to create executable solutions themselves? Not all, obviously, but an increasing number of them do. And their employers today desperately need to acquire low-code tools and expand their pool of software makers. And even for professional developers, low-code is faster, easier to maintain, and more transparent to the business. So that is why I am becoming increasingly optimistic about engaging the business automation community with low-code business automation using BPMN and DMN. It's a far larger addressable market than decision management. It's growing and is perfectly matched to today's architecture based on the cloud and REST APIs. But we know there are other low-code alternatives. So do they want to do it using standards? That is DMN in combination with BPMN. That is DMN's most obvious differentiator right now versus other low-code languages. Here are 2 reasons why they would. First, BPMN is widely used by business already for descriptive models. What's been missing in the BPMN world is a way for non-programmers to automate their processes. Now, integration with DMN offers them a way to do just that by creating executable business logic without programming and orchestrating the many REST APIs that are now available. Second, BPMN users already recognize the value of using a vendor-independent standard. DMN, like BPMN, is an OMG standard, and the 2 standards were designed to work together. DMN has a published spec. governed through a vendor-neutral process. It's continually maintained and updated. It's supported by multiple tools. You're not locked in to a single vendor. There's a model interchange format, so business users and developers can even use different tools. There's an open source runtime for it. There are multiple sources of information and training on how to use it. There's even a TCK that validates correct execution semantics. So ideally, what should happen now? I'd like to see more DMN tool vendors include support for field and box expressions, although I'm not too confident that will happen. In addition, I'd like to see new low-code business automation platforms emerge, likely focused on specific industry segments and solutions that adopt field and box expressions. I'm starting to see service providers in healthcare and financial services begin to explore moving to offer software solutions built with this low-code approach. An open source field runtime is available. And this is now an IBM product, so maybe that will help. Existing DMN tools like Tricytech continue to add features that make it even more powerful and easier to implement, such as a graphical debugger and support for importing powerful function libraries. And of course, endorsements by industry groups are in principle helpful. We have those from BPM Plus Health in the healthcare space and MISMO in the mortgage space. And hopefully those will lead ultimately to increased adoption in those industries. So we'll see. What started as an effort to enable subject matter experts to create decision logic themselves, while so far resisted within the digital decisioning community, could ultimately find a better path forward in low-code business automation. Thank you for your attention to this, and I'm open now to take questions or comments.
Thanks, Bruce. That was great. It was funny looking at your slides. I think it was like slide number 14, which had the one about the very complex BPMN diagram, and then a couple slides later where it was much more simplified and called decision services. That's like that's always been the sort of issue with somebody who comes at it from a process standpoint, somebody who comes at it from a decision standpoint, and how they tend to draw things. And I think that, you know, part of the problem can be that the Maslow's hammer thing. It's that if you're familiar with BPMN, then you're going to try to do it in BPMN, even if that's not the most appropriate way to do it. So training people to use both of these standards together, and if feel is the way to help bring that together as well and make them more capable for a citizen developer, then I think that's a great way to do it.
Right.
Does anybody have any questions or comments for Bruce?
Maybe I could ask a question. Mm-hmm. Bruce, you heard our discussion when I spoke about nested loops.
Yes.
And I wonder, what is your position? Would you think it's natural for business people to have to support nested loops, or should you find a better way to iterate through, or just to hide iteration completely?
Well, iteration is central to almost every solution that I've built, and DMN has great support for tables, which are lists of structures, and iteration is important. So I think people get led astray by the term business users, and I use the term myself. So if you think of software makers as a subset of business users, maybe it's only 10%. Um, the iteration capabilities, in field is called for in return, and there's actually now even a boxed expression for that to simplify it. Software makers can definitely learn to use it. They do. You have to show them how to use it. Loops can be nested within loops. And so you might say, well, they're not familiar with them. And most business users might not be familiar with them, but it's not programming. For me, I'm not a programmer. I couldn't write Java to save my life. But I would say that the constructs of feel, including iteration expressions, filter expressions, other maybe so-called complicated expressions, are within the capability of many non-programmers. So for me, the most important thing is to use the standard, use the language as it is, not try to break outside of it. The possibility of adding function libraries to do more complicated things in a simpler way is good, and that's supported by the standard. So I would include that, but my preference is to try to accept the standard and use it as it is, rather than say, well, I have an easier way, so I'd rather do it in my own proprietary way. That's just my personal feeling.
Thank you. You have a question from Lloyd on Slack.
Okay, I'll have to go to Slack and see it.
Sorry, I wasn't watching the Slack. So Lloyd is asking if you can describe some of the in-class perspectives since having field become such a focus, and what kind of students have been involved in these.
Yeah, so you know, for my business automation training, I require they take the DMN training first. And after that, I'd say that the business automation is mostly just dealing with the REST APIs and debugging. So, but feel, it's unfamiliar to almost all these students. I would say they are definitely more technical than typical business user. As I said, most of my BPMN method and style students who are using it for descriptive process documentation could not do this very well. So, but all of them, I would say, do have some understanding of what an expression is, what a function is. They could use, for example, the Excel formulas library, formulas ribbon.
Yeah, if somebody can handle Excel formulas, then they're pretty much set up.
And people are maybe misled by that because the only formula they use is the sum function, the sum a column or something. That's pretty trivial. But if you actually poke around the Excel formulas ribbon, you see, gee, these things are kind of involved. And I showed that example of finding the last word in a string too complicated. So, I mean, feel is much simpler. So if you understand, Boolean logic, the concept of expressions, the concept of data types, so you don't have to be a programmer to understand those things. So those would be the kinds of people who can do this. So they're ordinary business users, subject matter experts, they're business analysts, they're business architects. And there are some programmers, some developers, typically solution developers more than platform developers. So we had this discussion yesterday about low code, who likes low code, who hates low code.
Right, yeah.
So I find that platform developers have no need for low code. They want to use Java, but solution developers find low code very helpful. They can get it done much faster.
Well,
So,
not only can they get it done much faster, but then when there needs to be changes, because they're providing solutions directly to the business users probably, and then the business users will be like, oh no, can you change that so it looks like this instead?
and
then they
not
can make
only
the
that,
change very quickly.
it's one thing to teach a business user, subject matter expert to write these solutions, but it's far easier to train them to understand the solutions.
Mhm.
So even if you have a more technical person, a developer, or a solution provider, vendor, creates a solution, they can explain it to their clients, to their business users, who can look at it and understand it, and even make some modifications themselves if they're allowed to do that. So, which they definitely could not do with a Java program. So it has all those benefits. I think the low code community understands that. So, and I would say to the keynote yesterday, where I think there was very little awareness of DMN in the low code community from, I think, the survey that Gartner did. If we can try to engage that community with these capabilities, that could be a fruitful avenue for further development.
Okay, there's more discussion going on in Slack, but Romantis, actually, you had a good comment there. Could I ask you to unmute and then just voice your comment yourself?
Hello. Yeah, so
Hi.
probably that needs more context. So I'm coming more from a services implementation where we developed a technology stack on which we build internal insurance products. So we developed both our internal rule engine, decision table engine, and the whole low-code platform. And when we were considering this, basically the pros and cons were that essentially the users were working with the whole platform at once. So we want to define the rules, we want to define decision model, we want to define a life cycle of the quote, we want to define the persistence model, we want to define the UI. And in this case, to have a single expression language, which was tailored to our basically platform and capabilities, it made more sense than to accept the standard, which basically would feel better, no pun intended, for the decisions, but would lack in other application areas. And what the users usually don't want to do, we don't want to learn multiple different aspects for different areas. So
Yeah, and I think that idea of having one expression language that can be used in multiple areas is pretty valuable. It's like you don't want to have to, which is why many low code vendors will adopt a scripting language that looks a little bit like Excel formulas, because they say, well, people already know Excel formulas, so let's just use that. Not that it's the best language, but that it's something that people might already be familiar with.
Yeah, well, maybe for the decision community, that's the case, but for the whole platform, so essentially, well, I could give a good example from what Bruce was showing, because we faced a similar case with, for example, with vacation application, and basically factoring out which days are holidays, which days are weekends, etc., etc. So we faced a similar approach that once we code all this, once we capture all this in the decisions, and we have a separate service to do similar functionality, not related to vacations, what we get usually that, for example, users who are implementing UI and who have quite strict UX requirements, we say, yeah, you validate this and you say that this particular date range is valid or invalid, but what I want to get, I want immediately to show that those days are vacations, or you cannot select those dates. So in practice, what we get that while there is theoretical possibility to encapsulate this decision logic, once we start moving from implementation of a decision to tailoring the whole system, this starts to seep back into implementations. And this is the main challenge which we're getting when implementing low-code solutions. I commented a similar comment yesterday that usually we can do 80 or 90% with low-code with a platform, but usually it's those 20 or 10% who are killing and making or breaking a project. If something cannot be implemented in low-code tool and somebody has to go and implement it in code, how painful it is, how good it works with what was generated from low-code tool, etc., etc.
Okay, so we'll have to continue this discussion over on Slack. I need to get set up for the next presentation with Denzel, but this has been really interesting, and there's a lot of other additional comments over there. So Bruce, if you don't mind taking a look at what's going on Slack and maybe responding to some of those. And thank you very much for your presentation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.